Hello everyone, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0. Welcome back to the channel. Enjoy the fanfic. And let's begin. Part 5. Naruto woke the next morning feeling more rested than he had in an age. Calm, even, as though some monumental weight had been lifted from his shoulders overnight while he had slept. As if he'd been looking through a veil all his life and that shroud had only just now been torn away. The fiery blonde found that, for once in his life, he didn't wake up to the sound of voices in his head. In fact, he didn't hear much of anything at all. It felt cleansing to say the least. All the weight and worries of the bloody kingdom and being the blasted heir apparent seemed to have fallen away overnight when he wasn't looking, leaving him free and weightless. It might have something to do with the warm body nestled against him. What? That was his next thought as he came to amidst silken sheets and warm furs, realizing once again that he wasn't alone. Now, he clearly remembered taking Daenerys to bed last night. The memory stood in stark relief among the angry haze of yesterday. Her cries and her words as he entered her were branded into his brain, unforgettable. But still, he'd expected her to flee before the sun rose, as Marjorie had often done before her, as others had done even before that. That she hadn't was a bit of a shock. Yes, it proved quite the surprise indeed to find that she hadn't simply spirited herself away in the middle of the night. That she was still there would have once sent alarm bells clamoring in his head, but he simply could not bring himself to feel anything resembling worry as he laid eyes on her. Having fallen asleep against him some point after their lovemaking, the last Targaryen had not deigned to move hence. If anything, she appeared to have laid claim to him when he wasn't looking, her pale hair tickling his chest, one arm absently twined against his, trapped in his side, her visage smooth and peaceful in sleep. Even in slumber, her skin felt like fire to the touch, warmer than any flame. Azure orbs stole over her pale skin at a glance, rose-colored, just begging to be tweaked. Daenerys had surprised him last night with her tenacity and pleasure, fighting just as hard as him, giving as good as she'd got. On some level that frightened, but in the same vein, also excited. A will like hers came along once in a lifetime, and never in his own had he ever expected to meet someone who would match him in that aspect. Once more, it occurred to him that he was going to marry this girl. He no longer found the idea as appalling as he once had. He would be taking her hand in holy matrimony. And someday, they would have children. Together. Theirs. Heirs. His. The idea of blue-eyed girls running about with red-headed boys was strangely comforting in its own right. Insanely worrying, but comforting all the same. If such a time ever came to he'd raise them better than his own father had. He wouldn't use them as tools or weapons, and he certainly wouldn't undermine them every step of the way. Because they would be his children. His own flesh and blood. With her spirits, was he ready to be a father? Could he truly even live to shoulder such an incredible responsibility? As a bastard, Stannis had tried to do right by him, and look how that turned out. Still, he'd be lying if he said he didn't enjoy Daenerys Stormborn's company. Rather, he'd grown quite fond of her. The mother of dragons was like him, sheer fire and heat and paean. She said what she wanted, fought for what she believed in, and damn consequences to the seven hells. He respected that. They'd both come from nothing, no, less than nothing. Each of them had shouted and clawed and killed to get where they were now. Granted, they hadn't gotten off on the best of terms in the beginning, but they'd come to understand, if not respect one another. He still wasn't certain he could truly make her happy. That time had come and gone long ago. The years had poisoned him in more ways than one, left him feeling cold both within and without. And yet somehow, when he wasn't looking, he'd warmed up to her. To others. Found himself starting to consider other ways to live, ways that didn't have him cringing from voices in his head, methods that didn't drench his hands in blood. At times, in his brighter moments, he liked to think that he was getting better. In his darker ones he wondered if he was secretly backsliding and this was all some elaborate trap, a fell ruse meant to snare and tear him down the moment he took her as his wife. Wives, a small, nasty voice in his head reminded him. You're marrying them both, remember? And all you have to do is convince the king. Aren't you lucky? Naruto didn't feel particularly lucky. Of course, he would likely be marrying Marjorie as well, if the court had its way. Was that to be his life, now? His every act dictated by the king, by his father, forevermore at the whims of others. He supposed it could be worse. At least he'd come to know his potential brides before being flung into this madness. At any rate, he cared for them both in equal measure, even if they were likely to tear each other's eyes out. Where Danny had the will and the spirit to keep pace, Marjorie possessed the wit and the cunning to match him. Truth be told, and though he'd never admit it aloud, he was almost fond of Ariane, but that was another can of proverbial worms. For here in this moment, he found he couldn't take his eyes off Daenerys. Sighing, he absently stroked her face, smiling when she turned her cheek toward his palm. To his disbelief, she actually gave a small snort. It was so unladylike and surprising that he nearly guffawed outright, if only because he knew she'd never be caught dead making such a noise in public. Naruto clamped a hand over his mouth, shoulders visibly shaking from the effort of containing his mirth. Daenerys Targaryen wasn't exactly the vulnerable sort. Really, he couldn't resist poking her. It was just too easy. Morning, sleepyhead, he whispered, nuzzling her face with a finger. Time to wake up. Careful now, she spoke suddenly, eyes still closed, voice a quiet purr and surprisingly sober for one who should still be sleeping. I may not be able to kill you, but I can still find a way to make you miserable. Ah, so she was awake, then. Well, that just made him want to poke her all the more. One did not simply taunt the son of the stag and expect him to leave you be. Not after a bold claim like that. It was like painting a big red target on one's backside and them firmly telling them not to kick you. How could one resist? Is that so? Before he could make good on his promise, the last Targaryen, her eyes still smoothly shut and for all appearances gone back to sleep, nipped his outstretched finger with her teeth, nearly drawing blood. Ouch! Naruto found himself recoiling with a yelp, but the cry lacked rancor. You bit me. Bright eyes fluttered open and she rose, placing her chin on his shoulder. I did warn you. She sighed, supremely smug in her satisfaction. You have sharp teeth, ya know. Naruto groused. The mother of dragons offered him a small smile. The better to bite you with, husband. The last word sent a silent shiver of excitement through him. Husband. Not even a day into their newborn alliance and already she'd startled him. They weren't even truly wed yet, and still she called him such. Many things though she was and might yet be, Daenerys Stormborn was not humble, not in the least. She was concerned she'd actually hurt him, but her pride would never allow her to admit that. This was her not so subtle way of sounding him out, reaffirming their pact, of checking out his loyalties, searching for second thoughts after the frenzied, frantic coupling of last night. Oddly enough, Naruto found he had none. Husband. He rolled the word around on his tongue, testing it, get a feel for the way it tasted. Aren't we being a bit overeager? Am I? She replied coyly, fingers trailed the web of scars on his back. Though we were of one mind on this. I'm sure that we are, but, not one for mincing words, the prince craned his head to look back at her and hear that they were indeed, only to have his lover give him a firm push him back against the pillows. What? Paranoia flared and for an instant, he thought she was actually trying to smother him as his hated stepmother had tried to do so many times in his youth. But no, she did not thrust his face against the pillow as he'd expected, nor did she hold him there. Instead, she began to trace a series of soft, loving kisses along his back and shoulders. His scars, he realized after a moment's confusion. She was kissing his scars. That was oddly touching. Invigorated by this surprising display of affection, the son of the stag writhed upward, taking the fiery blonde in his arms. After a brief and surprisingly vigorous scuffle, Dany successfully managed to pin him against the mattress by his arms, long enough for her to seat herself firmly in his lap. With a sly, superior smirk, she leaned forward and took his now erect member firmly in hand. Naruto hissed softly, and that smirk became a triumphant one. "You were saying?" Sly little. Refusing to be bested so easily, he surged upward and broke her weakened hold. From there it was a small matter to tackle her back into the thick blankets, grip her firmly by the plant a chaste kiss on her lips, and sheathe himself fully in her already moist entrance. "Oh, Daenerys!" Startled gasp peaked into a moan of surprised pleasure as he entered her and she stretched to accommodate him. And just like that, the tables were turned. "Well, that truly depends on you, wife." He deliberately drew out the word as he thrust into her, relishing each pleased sigh that followed, the slight shivers that went through her as he pushed ever deeper into her core and once more made her his. "You acted as if you had me by the balls back there, but..." He bent down, kissing her peonately again, drawing another groan from the mother of dragons. "The way I see it, I'm the one who has you at a disadvantage, presently. Please let me know if you have any objections. Turn my words against me, will you?" She opened her mouth to continue, but all that emerged was a plaintive whimper as he hit a particularly sweet spot. Still, that look of burning defiance in her eyes only aroused him all that much more, promising that no matter how much pleasure she might be in now, there would be a reckoning for this. The son of the stag would absolutely have it no other way. It was almost as if he'd truly found a match for himself. "What's wrong? You seemed so CPER before. Is that a challenge, my lord?" she hissed. He hummed a laugh. Perhaps. Somehow, despite her lack of fine silks, despite not having her ever-growing dragons coiled around her, and despite the fact that even now she was moaning beneath him, Daenerys still projected an aura of smoldering authority. Even with her hair a mess from sleep and not so much as a single crown to her name, she still seemed every bit the queen she thought she was, the one she believed she deserved to be. "Let her be queen," the voices whispered to him again. "Let her bear that heavy burden for you so that you might yet be spared the troubles of the realm. Why take up that mantle when someone else is so willing to claim it for you?" But here, now, the only thing he could truly think of claiming was her. She must have seen his desire, for something flashed in her dark eyes, and this time, he didn't resist her. Daenerys yielded out of his grasp, and before he could think to stop her, kissed him fiercely, her lower lip caging his between them. Her tongue did not ask for tresp, instead ruthlessly plundering his mouth as she had her way with him. Slim hands placed themselves firmly upon his chest and with a firm shove, pushed him back against the mattress. Not content to be so easily dominated by his lover, Naruto retaliated and hooked his hands against her fingers, digging into the creamy expanse of her skin. Then he flipped her. "What are you, oh?" Dany uttered a very unladylike squeak of surprise as she found her perspective abruptly upended by the blonde bastard and thrown back to the thick covers. In the next instant Naruto spun and she found herself trapped beneath him. There was no violence in the action, no anger, no wrath, but the abruptness of it all left her briefly stunned, momentarily unable to move. Her pale hair splayed out against the pillows, cheeks flushed, lips parted, wide eyes staring up at him, fingers ringing against the sheets. Naruto shuddered. She looked so able. Gods. He muttered beneath himself, nearly unable to believe what he was feeling in that instant. "I think you were right. About," she gasped out, grinding her against him in silent need. "I might actually enjoy marrying you." The laughter, when it came, caught him completely off guard. It bubbled out of her all at once, a softy merry giggle like the sound of sweet music. Worse, he couldn't tell if she was laughing at him or what he'd just said unwittingly in his heated paean. Naruto decided he wanted to hear more of it. More of her. No, this angry stoic woman she'd become, but the girl who was laughing even now, holding her sides and shaking out of sheer mirth. He wanted to hear more. Wanted to hear her cry out his name. What's so funny? You. She said on a sigh, her hand rising to cup his cheek. You try so hard to push others away, yet when it comes down to it, you crave comfort. Don't you? Naruto felt the tips of his ears begin to burn red hot. She'd hit dangerously close to the nail on that one. I don't know what you mean. Shush. She reached up for him, arms circling his neck loosely, mouth molding marvelously against his. Naruto found himself yielding gladly to the kiss and even returning it somewhat, happy for the distraction from those cold, uncomfortable memories. It never occurred to him that she might be actually trying to divert his attention elsewhere until she started doing something incredible with her S. Naruto found himself half inclined to let her have her way with him for the time being, watching in fascination as she laid her hands on his chest and began grinding against him in an up and down motion. Her pert S seemed to quiver with every bounce, her cries growing more and more insistent in each movement. Are you trying to distract me, again? He ground out, gritting his teeth. That depends. Is it working? She purred, gazing down at him. Well, really, that depends, never mind. In any case, the son of the stag soon found he had other concerns as his body decided it had waited quite long enough for far too long, his release coming quickly. Evidently Daenerys felt the same. They came together quietly, their shared cries muffled in one another's mouths. The mother of dragons toppled forward a moment later and he was there to catch her, her head resting against his heaving chest. In his arms she felt warmer than ever before, as though he were cradling the sun itself to him. Afterward they lay together, sated, catching their breath. Daenerys proved the first to recover. Are you trying to get me up the spout? She laughed, rolling off his chest. Her hair seemed to shine in this light, composed of living flame. Hardly. Naruto caught himself chasing a smile with a sigh of his own. I'm not ready to be a father yet. I don't think I could handle it. Before she could answer, the door slammed open quite suddenly and armed men burst into the room. The intrusion was so sudden and abrupt that Naruto had killed two before he even realized what was happening. Snatching a pair of knives from their hidden place beneath his nearby, he flung one blade first into a man's eye through his helm, killing him instantly. His second sank to the hilt in another's throat, causing the intruder to drop with a startled gurgle, clutching in vain at the red mist spraying from his torn jugular. By then sense had reared itself and he realized these weren't Inns, but his father's guards, easily recognizable by their armor. Good. He would have felt absolutely horrid if he'd slain Ulrich just now in a fit of paranoia. Then he remembered that they'd just broken into his chamber. You lot, he began slowly, have 10 seconds to explain yourselves. Of the three remaining, their captain stepped forward, warily turning up the plate of his helmet. My prince. He raised a hand in a placating gesture. Calm yourself, please. An uneasy silence pervaded the room. What is the meaning of this? Naruto growled, flinging himself off the bed. Who sent you here? The king, my lord. The bearded man flinched at the molten red in the blonde stare. He demands your presence in the throne room at once. If looks could kill, he and his men would be a pile of charred ashes upon the floor. Then he should bloody well know not to have you barge in unannounced. A few eyes strayed to Daenerys, who had yet to move from the bed. He insists, my lord. The captain pleaded. Then he'll wait until I'm fully decent. Naruto growled, snatching up his leather jerkin and breeches. Stupid sods, don't you know to knock when a man's ing a woman? The guards quailed momentarily, but incredibly, their leader rallied. We heard noise and Yumed what? That we were under attack. Naruto rounded on the man with a roar as he tugged on his belt, fraying temper finally slipping its leash. You didn't even think to knock. How was I to react when armed men burst into my room? Because of your actions, 2 of your men are dead. Enough. Out of my way. I'll take this up with the old man. Sire, we were told to escort. I will join him as well. Dany declared suddenly, taking the wind out of his sails. The king did not summon you. The captain bristled. Naruto and Daenerys exchanged a terse, guarded look. I will accompany him. Her tone brooked no further argument. Right. As the lady says, then. The guards did their duty and escorted them both without any further protest, though Naruto secretly suspected they were bristling inwardly from Dany's defiance, for they followed them at a measured distance. These were truly Baratheon men after all, and she, a Targaryen. No love lost there. Still he was their prince and they at least refrained from openly speaking ill of her in his presence. It served just as well in the end, because their aloofness kept them from overhearing his and Daenerys' shared conversation. Why would your father summon you so suddenly? She whispered aside to him. The voices rushed in before he could reply, hissing charges. Treason. An attack. That damnable red woman. Or perhaps he's finally grown tired of you. Your guess is as good as mine. He forced out. The mother of dragons groaned. Oh, this bodes poorly. As ever, its high-arched ceiling took him aback momentarily, if only because he still wasn't accustomed to the sheer grandeur of it after all this time. Braziers of flame crackled upon heavy pillars as he walked past, their scorching fires licking hungrily at the foundations of the room. A strange incense seemed to linger in the air, dulling his senses and heightening his anxiety. He'd scorned the throne room and most of the Red Keep as of late, still, he did not let the concern he felt show on his face, and neither did Daenerys. For there, perched upon the Iron Throne, Stannis awaited him. Mercifully, Tyrion was present there beside the king. Unfortunately so too, was the Red Woman. And of course, that blasted Littlefinger. Naruto felt his jaw tighten. This boded poorly. Old paranoia plucked at him unbidden. He found himself considering how long it would take to draw the knife from his boot and rush his father. Or the door. With his strength, a few solid blows would surely splinter the solid frame, but at what cost? And would he be able to do in time? He had no armor and no weapons beyond that of his knife. Dany didn't even have that. Here was no other unblocked escape from the room that he was aware of, and even with his talents, he didn't relish the idea of having to fight his way out of the Red Keep. Stop panicking. He berated himself. Just breathe. They haven't said anything, yet. Taking a moment to compose himself, he started forward. Daenerys followed after him, her crisp footfalls echoing beside his in the empty space. Surprisingly, she did not walk ahead of him, nor did she deign to trail behind him as some might. To his disbelief, she stayed at right side and matched his pace step for step, even with him in all things. Then she took his hand and gave it a roaring squeeze, all whilst firmly lacing her fingers with his own. Naruto nearly missed his step and stumbled on the spot. It was only the most rigorous act of wills that prevented him from falling and allowed him to maintain his pace alongside his stoic demeanor. This very act smacked of rebellion, and he felt his respect for her climb another notch. If she'd meant to rear him, she'd done a fine job. Judging by his raised brow and the stern set of his jaw, Stannis didn't take kindly to this oh-so-tender act of solidarity. The king held his tongue until they'd reached the stairs, his grim expression never wavering. "Leave us," he commanded of the guards after a moment of silence. The Kingsguard did as they were bade, turning on the heels and sealing the great door behind them. Scarce had it closed than Naruto found himself face to face with the full storm his father's wrath. Now, Stannis did not explode into rage, he did not leap from the Iron Throne and condemn him for his deeds, nor did he move to strike him in his fury. This was a cold anger, one he hadn't seen since he was very young, and for the first time in decades, the Yin felt a touch of fear. His lord father had never been one to let his emotions rule him, but that look of disappointment etched into that stern visage stung more than words ever could. I am disappointed in you, his father declared flatly. What is the meaning of this treachery? Well, this was off to a stellar start. Daenerys tilted her head. The meaning of what, my king? She inquired with faux sweetness. You know full well what you've done, girl, the king growled. Do I, my lord? I was under the impression I didn't. Naruto bit his lip to stifle a smile. Oh, you're brave. Had the situation been any less dire, or the need for silence any more imperative, Naruto would have applauded her. She knew precisely what she was doing, and she was going out of her way to do it. To infuriate the brother of the hated Robert Baratheon responsible for the downfall of her family must have been as thrilling to her as ending an enemy was to him. She likely saw it as revenge, no matter how petty it might seem to anyone else. As things stood, however, it served only to provoke the king's wrath to new heights. Where Naruto's veiled insults merely riled Stannis, Daenerys' impudence had the king exploding from the Iron Throne, full of sound and fury. I should have your tongue cut out for such talk. Naruto stepped between them with a growl. Touch her and the hand comes off. Tyrion must have seen the storm in the eyes of Stannis, because he hurried to intervene before matters could escalate. Come now, let us be reasonable about this. Quiet, dwarf. The Lannister bristled at the slight, but didn't contest him. Perhaps, Baelish suggested after a moment's pause, we should hear what the prince has to say and let cooler heads prevail. Naruto nearly removed Littlefinger's head for his insipid pandering. He was certain the man had a hand in this fiasco, he just couldn't find a way to prove it. Still, the son of the stag found himself somewhat relieved to see that the anger in his father's eyes had dulled somewhat when he turned to face him. That bitter disappointment, however, had not. It still hung there like a shroud, an angry pall threatening to dredge up old, painful memories from his past. You are to marry Marjorie, yet I find you dallying with this girl. How in the seven hells did you even find out? He growled. Littlefinger's agents informed me. Well, that made things simple. His hand twitched, itching to strike the little weasel down on the spot for his smug smile. Bastard. Was he trying to undo him? It was only with a supreme effort of will that he restrained himself. I had planned on speaking to you of it today, he conceded, if you hadn't all but ordered me from my bed like an idiot. Watch your tongue. Or what? The blonde retorted, you'll cut it off. Don't be a fool and just listen. He is the Lord of Light's chosen, your father, and your king. Melisandre interjected, her manner smooth as silk. You should show him the respect he is due. Oh, do off. The blonde flung up a hand, forestalling her protest. If I wanted to discuss etiquette with a walking hypocrisy, I'd chat up Joffrey. He bit out. Oh, wait, he's dead, by my hand, for being an idiot. Blue eyes the color of the blackest seas flicked up and down her body, as though deciding where best to place a dagger. Say, am I sensing a pattern here? Enough. Stannis barked, returning to his throne. Melisandre, this matter is no longer your concern. Return to your chambers. I will summon you when I have need of you. To her credit, the Red Woman didn't protest. She sketched a humble bow and retreated. As my lord wills it. No sooner had she departed than that burning gaze found Naruto once more. I don't know why you keep her around. The matter is not up for debate. Stannis declared. Yes, it is. Naruto shot back. I have a very good reason for. No more stalling. Your wedding shall be on the morrow at dawn. He declared stonily, his voice as rigid and unbending as the throne in which he sat. You will take Marjorie Tyrell as your wife, and the Targaryen girl, for here his gaze did pee dismissively over Daenerys, will be given to the north and become a ward of the Starks. She won't be any trouble to anyone, there. Daenerys stiffened, and sensing an impeding outburst, Naruto rushed in. Father, I said enough. Stannis' voice cracked out at him like eliciting the slightest of flinches from his son. You will do as you are told. Your silver tongue won't help you, this time. Naruto sighed, feeling all his expectations crumble. Then perhaps my blade will. He growled. Then he climbed the steps to meet him. Slowly at first, then with increasing resolve. Stannis followed his ascent with a wary eye, watching intently as his air cleared the roughly hewn stairs. One of the Kingsguard moved to stop him. Much to his detriment. Naruto's fist cracked outwards with impossible speed and struck the man dead on in his plate, dealing him a solid blow and denting the gold-painted metal with an explosive crunch. The Kingsguard didn't so much stagger as he did soar, flung away like a rag doll, to crash into one of the pillars at the far end of the chamber. Then, his broken but still very much living body suffered the misfortune of slumping into the brazier below said pillar with a dull clang. Unable to move due to their shattered spine, he began to burn. The shrieks that followed curdled the very blood. No one paid them any heed. Now it was the son of the stag who gazed down at his father, gaze boiling with wrath. You should heed the counsel of your advisors, your grace. He spoke with limpid sincerity. It would not do to dismiss her so easily. Stannis scowled. I have received no such counsel. You are being counseled at this very moment. Naruto warned, his voice taking on an uncharacteristic edge, jagged and cutting. I suggest you heed it lest you make a mistake. It would truly be unfortunate were we to need another king so soon after Joffrey's untimely ping. The nation would indeed mourn you. Daenerys hissed quietly beneath her breath. She hadn't expected it either. This was as blatant a threat as they came, a promise of complete and utter destruction if the king didn't heed his words and counsel. Naruto didn't even have to draw a blade to convey his intention. Those words carried the dire implications more surely than any weapon ever could. The kind of threat no man, even a prince, would ever dare utter for fear of being executed on the spot. Yet Naruto had simply thrown down the gauntlet without a second thought, daring his progenitor to pick it up. Stannis could barely believe it, either. A certain part of him was almost proud that his heir possessed such courage, a resolve that would not bend, a will that refused to break. The rest was furious that the young man would so openly defy him. Who was he to go against him like this? Who was he to think he could so easily usurp him, his will, with a word? Are you threatening me, boy? He growled, rising to tower over his son. I made you what you are. You're right. I am what you made me. Naruto acknowledged with a curt nod. Be thankful I've learned to be better. Now you listen. I know you despise the Targaryens, but that gives you no right, do you hear me, to simply exile Daenerys. She, and here he did fling a finger at the mother of dragons, is not here to usurp you, she is not here to take your throne, and she is not going to be exiled on my watch. I will not have it, do you hear me? I will not have it. Not just that, but she has dragons. Dragons, you old coot. They grow larger every day. And you want to throw them away for no reason. With those beasts on our side, the whole world would bow to us. And you want to remove their mother. Are you mad? Father and son stared one another down, neither willing to cave. Then, remarkably, the king did just that. What would you have me do, then? Naruto sighed. If I might offer a suggestion, my king. Tyrion implored. I believe the lad has a solution. You ought to listen. Naruto shot the dwarf a grateful look, but his turmoil remained. Part of him had always known it would come to this. The idea of having more than wife had always been an alien one to him. If not for Littlefingers, or was it truly Varys behind all this manipulations, he never would have given it so much as a second thought. Even now he only recently begun to consider it even a remotely viable option at all. But this was the only path he could see that didn't end in exile or death for him or those he cared for. Exhaling deeply, he uttered the words that would seal his fate. I propose that I do as the Targaryens once did, he said. And what, pray tell, is that? I shall marry them both. Daenerys stiffened. What? It was both what she had wanted, and entirely unexpected. That he'd argued for her and against her exile was wonderful, but marrying her and another. Thinking it was one thing, hearing it another, and learning that it was to be her fate was something else entirely. What was she to think of this? Very well. Stannis's sudden concession drew a baffled blink from all. You've made your point. Feeling weary indeed, he waved him on. Marry the Targaryen girl as well then, if you're so smitten with her. But on your head be the consequences. The wedding will be tomorrow, you will be married, and then you will go to the twins to witness the wedding as promised. Gods take you. Naruto bowed. As you command, father. Genuflecting, he turned to depart. Son. Stannis's voice rang out at his back. Naruto paused. Yes. Stannis was silent for a long time, gazing at the rigid back of his progeny. On some level, he remained conflicted. Oh, he acknowledged the boy for his clever manipulations, of course. He'd found the best path for both parties, if not necessarily the easiest. The boy had the will to face him down in full sight of others and not retreat. For that, if nothing else, he had his respect. Respect wouldn't save him a second time. He'd just made it clear that he had his own ambitions, his own desires. And should those desires ever fall into conflict with that of the realm? If you ever threaten me like that again, you will die. The blonde turned and offered a humble bow. Perish the thought, Your Grace. Turning his back to his father, he marched to the doors, flung them open, and stormed out. Leaving all behind. Well, Tyrion murmured darkly to himself, that went better than expected. It had indeed, far better than he'd expected it to. He'd thought swords might be drawn and blood spilled, that a prince might well yet become a king. Come, my lady, he said, offering her his hand, I shall escort you to your chambers. You have a wedding to prepare for. I'm sure we can find something for you to wear. Daenerys could only manage a nod. None noticed the hidden smile on the visage of Petyr Baelish. Everything was falling into place. Opening parenthesis. Meanwhile, everything was coming undone. Marjorie Tyrell knew this. Just not how to stop it. Even as she read the missive, her mind was racing, plotting, planning. Her position, once so secure, had been eroded in a matter of moments, and she hadn't even been told. She'd had to learn of it through a note from one of her grandmother's spies, and it hurt far more than it should, more than she could have expected. The missive wounded her far more than words ever could, and she found herself sinking into her chair with a repressed groan, fighting tears. She should have known. She should have glimpsed her ruin in the Targaryen girl's eyes when she was first presented to the court. It all seemed so long ago now. Just as she first sensed something amiss when the prince had argued so fervently against her being thrown back into the sea. She'd thought him merely chivalrous, against the idea of a woman being harmed. Clearly, she'd been mistaken. Not just in refusing to meet with the mother of dragons, but for allowing this dalliance to become this. Somehow Daenerys Targaryen had gotten her claws into him, she and her dragons both, and now she feared she would be losing him to her entirely. Part of her suspected the spider had a hand in all this, or perhaps even that wretched Littlefinger, with his gutless smile. Someone was scheming to undo them all, but for the life of her, she couldn't figure out who. Someone was sowing dissent in their ranks and chaos in their hearts. Someone was doing a very good job of it, at that. It no longer mattered, she supposed. She could no longer argue this. By rights, the Baratheons were fulfilling their promise. She would indeed be married to the prince and with luck, become the next queen. They had neglected to mention, however, that Naruto would be taking Daenerys also as his wife. It smacked of disrespect, and worse, it angered her. She had thought they had an understanding. That he cared for her. She'd even found herself slowly starting to care for him. He was a good man, an excitable one perhaps, but a kind one, and honest to a fault. Perhaps that was why this hurt, thus. The idea of sharing him with another should repulse her, and by some measure, it did. Well, she certainly had a way to remedy that, didn't she? Steeling herself, she crumpled the note in her hand. One way or another he would be hers. The sun sulked low in the sky over King's Landing. Like a recalcitrant child not quite yet ready to rise, the great fiery orb peeked over the horizon with great hesitation and reluctance, as though it weren't keen to bring on the dawn of a new day. One might even be forgiven for thinking it melancholy. After all, today would prove to be a day among days. A date that, for better or worse, would forever live on in the hearts and minds of the people. Bards would sing songs of this day, and many a scholar would inevitably tell their own tales in the years hereafter as opinion and rumor warped the story, but here, today, this moment would live forever. When one looked back and asked how it all began, all would say here. It started with the dawn. Here, in the wee hours before waking, the quiet before the storm, all lay still. Well, nearly all. Though even the lowliest of beggars were just only now beginning to stir from their beds, the sky was already teeming with life. One had but to gaze up at the Red Keep to see the dragons wheeling overhead. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion, each impossible to miss as they circled and banked overhead, calling to one another. On occasion, one would make a dive for the water, snatching up an unlucky fish or gull who dared too close. Fresh air and freedom had done wonders for their growth. Drogon was already nearly large enough to ride, and his siblings weren't far behind in that. In the coming months they'd grow large indeed. As though spurred from its stupor by their cries, the sun finally rose, and with it marked the day of the prince's wedding. It was to be a day of celebration, a union not seen since the heydays of the Targaryens. All told, it had proven a massive undertaking, planning such an event with little more than a day to spare. Thankfully, those handed the task proved themselves worthy of it and prepared a grand event the like of which none could imagine. Nearly all the nobles were invited to attend, and more than a few peasant folk on the prince's behalf. This didn't sit nearly so well with the upper CL, the latter of WHCH were told to suck it up or sod off. Regardless, the wedding, and the festivities that followed, would commence soon. Indeed, the whole of Westeros itself seemed to wait with bated breath. None more so than Petyr Baelish. Years of painstaking plotting and scheming had led to this moment. Seeds planted so long ago had at long last borne fruit. Pieces edged across the board were finally in position. Here, on the day of what would prove to be a wedding among weddings, Littlefinger deemed himself ready to give the realm one final push and watch the chaos unfold. A small smile plucked at his mouth as he overlooked the sordid, sprawling expanse of Flea Bottom from his room in Red Keep. So small, those below. So insignificant. So petty. So easily swayed. All it took was a rumor here, an act of violence there, and one had them eating out of their hand. Or he very soon would. Mere hours from now the wedding would commence. Ah, and what a wedding it would be. He had only to give the order. On a certain level, Littlefinger knew he owed his successes thus far to luck as much as he did skill. Make no mistake, he counted himself incredibly fortunate to have progressed to this point in his plan without losing life or limb. Days, weeks, months, years of effort to maneuver himself into his present position in King's Landing. Bending the ears of those who considered themselves his betters, and there were many, had been no mean feat. Coin and influence were required. Years spent clawing and scraping his way up the ladder of chaos to stand where he stood now. All of that arduous, painstaking progress had nearly been undone by Stannis' unexpected triumph at the Battle of Blackwater. In an instant everything was knocked askew, and he'd found himself scrambling to recover. Joffrey slain in battle, Tywin cut off from the capital, Cersei and her children ripped away from the Iron Throne. All in the blink of an eye. A fell alliance between Baratheon, Stark, and Tyrell. Who could have foreseen such a thing? He'd been cautious after that, waiting days, weeks even before making a move. Stannis was a well-known quantity in King's Landing, as was his heretical faith in the Lord of Light. His heir was another matter. Naruto. That blasted, insufferable boy. Time and time again he'd nearly undone everything. Time and time again, Baelish found himself scrambling to compensate. Adjust. His kindness was matched only by his brutality. His wiles, only by cynicism. The latter had actually been a stroke of luck for him. He'd made a foolish remark and he'd capitalized on it. Brought from rumbling seas, Daenerys Targaryen should have been his undoing. Instead, he'd befriended the mother of dragons. Worse, the blonde bastard somehow convinced his father to let him marry her and the Tyrell girl both. Thankfully there were ways to remedy that. Better yet, he knew the boy wouldn't kill him outright, if only for the suspicion his death would cast upon him. That alone had proved his saving grace. Now he need only keep a weather eye out for inns. It was almost a shame to take Naruto out the game, really. A pity, even, to rid himself of a worthy foe. Ah, well, such was the way of life. Men would always fall to their baser nature. But not him. No, he was above such petty grievances. Everything would be his. Today. Yes, it began today. The attack came suddenly. It was not a knife in the dead of night that claimed Littlefinger's life, no rain of arrows in the street, nor even an ambush in the darkness of his quarters. The Reaper came for him quickly and quietly, neither in the form of raven nor dove but in the softest of whispers. Not with a shout, but a sigh. There was no proclamation, no warning, nothing to herald his last moments beyond that of the bottle in his hand, the brandy within, and the ever-present plots swirling in his mind. He exhaled quietly, reveling in the chaos to come, took another sip of wine, made to inhale in. What? Quite abruptly, he found couldn't breathe. All sense and thought tumbled out of him in disbelief. A trembling hand rose, alarmed to find himself bleeding from the nose. An alarming weakness seized hold of him and he stumbled, clutching at the wall with his good hand for support even as he clung to his goblet. Goblet. His eyes bulged as his lungs labored, glaring in disbelief at the tainted drink. Poison. It must be. No. He'd been so careful. He'd checked everything for days. Weeks. So how was this happening? Antidote. He had to make it to his shelf, find the right one, find the URK. In the light of the early morn, the shadow of death fell over Littlefinger. Air stole away from his lungs and he found himself coughing. Choking. His throat seized and his lungs spasmed anew, grasping at oxygen that denied him. The goblet tumbled loose out of his grasp and clattered to the floor, staining the rug blood red as he pounded at the door. Moments later he joined it on the floor, his muscles betraying him in their death throes. By some miracle he still retained enough strength to raise his gaze, fingers curling against the damp carpet in his last moments. All his clever plans, all his plots, all his schemes, everything. All was forgotten in that instant. He soon found himself wishing he hadn't looked. For it was at this moment that the solid wood frame eased open and his would-be killer entered the room, followed by a lone guard. No, not a guard. The man was a sellsword. A known one at that. Had he possessed his faculties he might have recognized him. But his name escaped him here in his final breaths. He half expected to see the prince there beside him, gloating over him in his defeat. Instead he peered up at a woman through blurry eyes, darkness creeping in at the edges of his vision. Trembling fingers fumbled for his dagger and a boot crunched down on his hand, stifling them. Littlefinger couldn't even bring his aching lungs to scream. He could only stare, eyes bulging. Clad in a thin gown the color of amber roses, his killer padded across the room towards him, nimbly evading the growing puddle of wine and blood spreading from his body as she did so. Arriving at her destination, she crouched before him and reached down, cradling his pallid visage in her hand. Hello, Lord Baelish. Arianne Martell smiled at him, a thin, cruel gesture that didn't quite reach her eyes. Please, Don't get up on my account. Blood frothed from his lips, indicative of his disbelief. Don't look so surprised. She hummed. Poisoning you was no easy feat. Very costly, even. The tears of Lee were a dear expense. As I'm sure you're well aware. Littlefinger was very much aware. Even now he could feel the powerful toxins eating through his intestines, leaving him to shudder in agony. No doubt you are wondering why I would go to such lengths. The dusky woman mused aloud, uncaring of the spy's plight. You see, the love of a woman is a powerful thing. In the end, it all comes down to that one person or persons you care for. When a man truly loves a woman, she becomes his weakness. When a woman truly loves a man, he becomes her strength. Her life. Her very reason for living. And sometimes, cold, dark eyes flicked away from the ledge and back to Petter's trembling form, watching intently as the last of his life crept away from him. We do terrible things for those we love, and they, us. This is called exchange of power. Have you ever truly loved anyone, Littlefinger? Yes. She tilted her head, considering. Have you ever been loved in return? No, I thought not. You see, it is love that compels me to do this. You are a thorn in my love's side, one he has been unable to pluck. So here I am, plucking it for him, while he remains unaware. And here we are. No one will know. They will think a sudden sickness took you. Not uncommon for the times. Quietly serene, the princess reached down, cupping his chin in her hand for one final, lasting moment. Come now, she soothed. Look at me. Yes, there we are. That's it. Give me your final breath. Littlefinger managed a weak, rasping gurgle as the blood pooled and bubbled in his throat. I do not hate you, Lord Baelish, she declared softly, kissing his forehead. After all. No. His mind raged here at the last. I can't die. I deserve more. My plans. Her hand fell, and a crushing weight seized his chest, his vision fading. Chaos is a ladder. Darkness. Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. Bronn loved the sound of gold. There was just something about the telltale clink of countless coins jiving together in a pouch that spoke to a man. Stirred him. Gold ran the world, after all. You bought food with it, ed for the stuff, even killed for it. With enough gold you could live in comfort and excess to the last of your days. He wasn't motivated by greed, however. No, surely not. He might be a cutthroat, but he knew which way the wind was blowing. The lion's time had come and gone. Now were the days of the stag, the wolf, the dragon, the rose, and the viper. So long as the stag sat the Iron Throne, there his loyalties would lie. Thanks to the prince he lived well, ate well, was paid well, and allowed to do as he pleased for the most part. That earned his loyalty, if not outright friends. This unpleasant task was merely another part of that loyalty. The sweet reward of being paid for a hard day's work aside, today's reward had proven particularly satisfying for one. After all, it wasn't every day someone paid him to help snuff out an evil little bugger like Littlefinger. Annoying little twit. Bastard had it coming for months now, but no one had been able to uproot him for fear of being made a culprit. Until now. Better yet, this small act required no change of allegiance on his part. He hadn't even needed to swing his sword but merely stand watch and make certain no one witnessed the crime. Again, an easy task. Littlefinger was almost universally disliked these days. As far as Bronn was concerned, the Martell girl had the right of it, ending him before the war started again. Petter Baelish had been a thorn in his benefactor's side for too long now, one that needed to be plucked. And plucked him they had. There would be a brief fuss as King's Landing tried to puzzle out Littlefinger's death, of course, but it would p. Qyburn's inspection would inevitably fail to produce any incriminating evidence and eventually interest would fade. Not a bad maester, that one. Knew his craft through and through. Bit creepy, though. Still, he was loyal and undoubtedly an ally. He also understood that before one could usher in the new, the old must be put to rest. As far as Bronn was concerned, that made him a friend in his book. You're smiling, sellsword. Drawn from his reverie, the mercenary stifled a small smirk. He'd almost forgotten Arianne was still with him. He admitted, a spring in his step as they entered her chambers. Suppose I'm in a good mood. You don't regret your part in all this. The sellsword laughed as he eased the door shut behind her, careful to thumb the latch as he did so. Wouldn't do to have someone barging in, after all. Might give them the wrong idea. After a moment's consideration he favored the princess with a nod. Baelish was a cunt. Better to get rid of him sooner rather than later. Agreed. A peal of bell-like laughter rang through the air as she gave a light twirl. Who better to devour a snake than a viper herself? Careful now, Bronn admonished, bracing his back against the door. We don't want to get blood all over your pretty dress. Quote. Arianne blinked, then glanced down, noting the smears of blood on her hands. You're right, I suppose. I must wash. Her gaze flicked him up and down invitingly as she stepped toward the southernmost corner of the room. Care to join me? Bronn nearly choked on his own spit. Tempting, but I'm afraid not. Your loss, then. Suppose so. For her part the Dornish princess didn't reply. At least, not with words. Instead she paced away towards her bed and without further aplomb, removed her bloodied dress and flung it across the room. She wasn't wearing anything underneath. A lesser man might have averted his eyes at such spectacle. Bronn felt no such inclination. Arianne was a beautiful young woman, downright gorgeous, really. Wild and wanton like any Dornish elle, a temptress beyond compare. Probably a hellcat in the sheets, too. Under any other circumstance he'd be more than happy to hop into bed with her. In this case, however, caution outweighed desire. She was very much a creature of Payon and he'd seen what that Payon could drive her to do. Besides, the prince seemed to favor her to some extent and who knew where that would go. No, had no intention of bedding this viper. Didn't mind watching her, though. A few tense moments passed as he watched Arianne draw herself a bath, each movement deliberately drawn out, long and lingering, the light trickling through the window to accentuate her every curve. When she finally slipped into the basin it was almost a relief, if only because he could no longer fully glimpse all of her. Even then the sight of her glistening form nearly drove him mad with desire. She knew it, too. Damn, how long had it been since he'd had a good tumble? Perhaps he ought to pay a visit to the brothel before the wedding. Might do him some good. Her coy smile was no less threatening. If you so much as breathe a word of this to anyone, you'll gut me, right? I know. He mimed a silencing motion across his throat. Not a word. Good. And why should he speak of this? His coin pouch was already full to bursting, thanks to her generous donation. Add that to his already substantial pay and he was well on his way to amming a small fortune. Not nearly as much as the vaunted Lannisters or any of the other noble houses, but it was a start and a fine one at that. At this rate, he'd be able to afford his own hold this time next year. A far cry from where he'd been at the beginning of all this. Tell me about him, Arianna commanded suddenly, running a wet cloth across her S. Naruto. The prince, I mean. Who was he before? Before all this. The princess gestured expansively at the grand room. I've heard the stories, but I suspect few know the truth. Unlike you. And therein lay the rub. Don't know much about him really. Bronn confessed, choosing his words carefully, his eyes taking on a distant look. You'd have to ask Tyrion for the whole story. All right. At her scathing look he held up his hands and continued. I'll tell you what I do know. He came to King's Landing one day with a band of sellswords out of the blue. Just waltzed right in, like he owned the damn place. Demanded an audience with Cersei. He paused, noting Arianne's faint smile at the mention of the former queen. Next I knew he was meeting with that pretentious little twat Joffrey. Managed to track me down a bit after and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. What was the offer? Ariane tilted her head, toweling off her shoulders. Defy him and die, or help him and live. The sellsword deadpanned. Obvious what I chose. Why ask me all this? Planning to write a memoir or something? There's no need for language. Isn't there? The mercenary snapped, an ember of anger igniting in his chest. He'd heard enough to know where this was going. Way I see it, this ends one of two ways. You waste your time trying to get that boy to love you, and you end up dead. Ariane scoffed. And the other? Maybe he takes you on as a mistress or a concubine. Bronn relented reluctantly, not liking the sudden spark of bemusement in her eyes at his admission. If you're lucky, you'd get a bastard off him a few years down the road and he acknowledges him. It's the best you could hope for. He's already taking 2 wives, don't think he's keen to bring in a third. He followed the sly temptress intently as she emerged, dripping from the bath, all traces of desire burned away by the realization of what she intended. My advice: don't do it. Don't with him or he'll put your pretty little head on a spike. You claim to know him. No, but I've seen enough to know he's not right in the head. The warrior countered, pushing himself off the wall as his benefactor slipped into a silk robe the color of gilded roses. You don't get it. He's not like you and I. He isn't motivated by greed or even lust. He hears things, sees things, voices, visions. Now, I don't know if they're real, and quite honestly I don't care, but they're real enough for him. A noble you can predict. Even a vicious noble. But a madman, who's to say he won't wring your neck if your little plan goes sideways? Ariane pretended to consider his words. If you're that afraid of him, then why stay? Riches. Greed. Mostly. Probably too stubborn for my own good. Tell me, what did he promise you? For starters, Castle Rock. Ariane actually blinked. A fine prize, if true. Trust me, that one keeps his word. Bronn replied, moving to follow her as she made for the door, then opening it for her. I know that much. You're a loyal man. Loyal. The mercenary barked a harsh laugh. Me. Maybe. I'm just good at reading people. Well said. After you, my lady. He paused on the threshold, risking one last look at the grand chamber before departing. From the window he could barely see the dragons circling the spires, hear them calling to one another. This was what he wanted. Was that truly the sum of his meager ambitions? It never ceased to amaze him how easily lords and ladies took such things for granted. Half the folk in Flea Bottom would kill for a room like this. Once upon a time he would have killed for a place like this. In all likelihood he still would. Knighted or not, he was still a simple man, through and through. He had simple needs, simple wants, simple desires. Castle Rock. Gods, it would be a feat to have a place like that. One way or another, he was getting that bloody castle. If he didn't get himself poisoned first. Or thrown off a cliff. Or torn to shreds. Or set afire. As luck would have it, he wasn't the only one thinking of fire. Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. Fire and blood. Daenerys found herself recalling the words of her house as the dawn broke. As she gazed upon her own reflection. Odd that she found herself thinking of them now. Because she scarcely recognized the woman staring back at her. A stranger in a strange land, wearing a strange dress, her long pale hair beautifully combed and left to cascade down her back. The dress itself was a marvel of work, a seamless blend of fabric and armor both. Most might balk at the idea of wearing such a thing to a wedding, but the Dany found she rather approved of the choice. She looked resplendent, fierce, beautiful. Whether through deliberate design or simple oversight on their part, Daenerys was inclined to believe the former. For the dressmaker had crafted her wedding dress in the colors of House Targaryen. A deeply flowing masterpiece cascading in the colors of black and red as no other before it. Bearing a moderate neckline and an open back, its make might have been forgiven for simply leaving their craft there, but instead they'd gone a step further. A great, red, three-headed dragon roared back at her from the black of her dress. Stitched in where the armored corset met fabric, its three jaws brimming with stitched flame that seemed to curl up towards pauldrons sheathing her shoulders before tapering off into the short train of her dress. It was an outright slap in the king's face and a masterwork, no two ways about it. She adored it. Still, it was an absolute chore to wear with the armored bits. What would Viserys think of her now? Ah, her dear dead brother so long forgotten. He'd probably laugh at her and call her a fool, the insipid little twit. Even in death, he served a purpose. What a fool he'd been, allowing others to lead him on as he had. An ugly notion reared its head, then. Did that make her a fool as well? Mildly disturbed by the path her thoughts had taken, she quashed that traitorous image and returned to her reflection, both metaphorical and physical. A hair had fallen out of place and she reached up to pull it back, only to find herself ruthlessly chastised by her handmaiden. An irritated noise escaped her lips and Missandei's hand tapped her palm firmly, reminding her not to slouch lest she create wrinkles in her dress. Even so, a touch of annoyance lingered beneath the surface as Eerie and Doria fussed over her, for as her trusted friends made their last adjustments Daenerys finally felt her temper slip its leash. Blast it, Khaleesi, you must stay still. The mother of dragons groaned aloud. Enough. I've been still for an hour, now. With an indignant shake of her shoulders the last Targaryen stepped down from the pedestal and stormed toward the balcony. Missandei let her go with a patient sigh, for which Daenerys was grateful. Everything was spinning and she desperately needed a moment to think. To breathe. There had hardly been such ceremony for her first wedding. She certainly hadn't expected a second in this lifetime. The thought nearly stole all her courage away, and she found herself clutching the railing in a death grip. Distantly, she beheld her dragons wheeling about the high spires of the Red Keep. Well, two at least. Where was? Oh, a breath burst out of Daenerys as Drogon abruptly made his presence known in typical fashion. A large dark shadow descending on the balcony, rearing up before her with such force that his landing blew her hair back. Alighting effortlessly before her, the young dragon beat his wings once and tucked them inward. His snout still wet with the blood of a fresh kill. Her child edged his head and regarded her with a questioning trill. Dany blinked, taking a moment to gather her wits about her as she began to stroke his long, powerful neck. Gods, he was getting big. Nearly too big for the balcony, even. His brothers weren't far behind. They'd grown all too fast once they'd reached the south. There was endless room for them to roam here, to hunt, even and so long as their prey wasn't human, none dared strike at them for fear of offending the crown. She'd be able to ride Drogon soon. No, perhaps he was large enough already. Ride him where? Part of her longed to simply climb on his back and fly away from all this, far, far away. Absently she caressed his frills, contemplating all that had led to this moment. It had seemed like such a grand idea at the outset, yet now. When Missandei took hold of her arm, she nearly started. Come, Your Grace, she soothed. We need to get you ready. Daenerys frowned slightly. I'm not the queen. The former slave arched an eyebrow, the ghost of a smile plying at her lips. Not yet. Point taken. Warmed by her friend's words, she reluctantly allowed herself to be guided away from Drogon and back towards the balcony, but a thorn of hesitation pricked at her mind and held her captive. She wasn't accustomed to such finery, let alone armor. Could that be it? Was that the root of her anxiety? Or was it something more sinister? She shuddered to think of it. Her reflection mirrored the motion and she scrutinized her doppelganger with dark intensity. She appeared flawless. That didn't matter. She was a Targaryen. She needed to do better than flawless. This is ridiculous. I look absurd. Missandei clicked her tongue in disagreement. Nonsense. The prince will adore you. Will he truly like this? Of course, Khaleesi. Eerie hastened to add, he would be a fool not to. Doria scoffed in agreement. Daenerys reflected. A fool he may be, but he's my fool. Regarding herself in the mirror once more, she took a moment to preen. It should have galled her to admit it, but Daenerys found she actually cared for the bastard. She enjoyed his company and all the chaos that came with it. He wasn't some self-righteous ponce as she'd initially been led to believe. He was a warrior. Like her, he'd fought for all that he'd had and more. He'd made his enemies tremble and won the right to stand where he stood now. Yet despite this he wasn't cruel, didn't delight in violence and vice as others might. Time and time again he'd proven himself gentle. Silly at times perhaps, but still gentle. She might even come to love him someday as she'd loved her last husband. Her heart wrenched painfully then, not at the thought, but at the memory of what she'd nearly had. Of what had been taken from her. Khal Drogo he was not, nor could anyone hope to ever be, yet she found herself strangely content with the knowledge that Naruto would soon be hers. Hers, regardless of what the Tyrell woman would say or have her believe. That was a bridge she would have to cross of burn soon, but for now she felt oddly at peace. She'd chosen this, so perhaps that was why she felt so at ease. No one had forced her hand, rather she'd entered into this union of her own volition. Here, now, she stood proud, a far cry from the terrified girl she'd been that day. She'd insisted on keeping her retinue in spite of the trouble it would cause, and in a remarkable show of humility, Naruto had indulged her. Missandei was the most recent acquisition from that old life. Well, stolen from it, actually. It had been one of her last acts before she'd been abducted and dragged to Westeros. If she couldn't bring an army of Unsullied, then the least she could do was free one slave. Ser Jorah had been more than happy to swing his sword for her in that regard. Krasny's Monaclo's frozen face fixed on a spike. Now that was a still pleasant memory. He'd been a loathsome little man, and his death had given her no end of pleasure. Speaking of Mormont, pivoting, Daenerys risked a glance at the door, where a lone man stood guard. Said man hadn't spoken a word all day. Jorah's face held incredible longing as he gazed upon her. Although he'd been permitted to attend the day's festivities, his fate remained uncertain. He would likely be sent off to the wall if the king had his way. Not so, if the prince had his say. Perhaps the latter was for the best. She was sad to see him go, but she could see how a man who sworn himself to her and her alone might be viewed as a threat in the eyes of King's Landing. Only time would tell if he might be permitted to stay. Rumor had it he might even be pardoned for his crimes, perhaps even allowed to rejoin his house. She wasn't sure he would, given the chance. But enough about such sorrowful things. Today was her day. Pausing, she took one last glance in the mirror. She felt like a queen. Shall we begin? Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. The rose stood in full bloom. Marjorie Tyrell quietly ignored the nattering of her maids, lost in her own thoughts as they added the finishing touches to her gown. Her mind lay decidedly elsewhere. Today would change everything, or condemn her to a life of misery. That was all there was to it. One or the other. She would either have her way in the hours to come or, gods forbid, actually have to make peace with Daenerys Targaryen. The thought rankled her. Naruto belonged to her. The prince was hers. Any other thought was unacceptable, humiliating at the worst. They'd been promised to one another before that whore came prancing in with her dragons. Worse, she'd actually come to care for the bastard, which made today's offense sting all the more. She took one last moment to collect herself, taking her dress in. A swooping neckline revealed a generous portion of cleavage. Red hair gathered atop her head, revealing an elegant neck and in gold earrings with sapphires at their heart. She needed nothing more. Marjorie knew full well the power of her beauty and the effect it held on men and women alike. She didn't much. The colors of her house were often more than enough. She knew the game, and played it well. That had been enough. Or, At least it had been, until today. Until that Targaryen wench swooped in and tried to claim the prince for herself. She wanted to say, tried, because to believe otherwise was to acknowledge that she'd all but lost in the game before had truly begun. Never before had she known such shame, never before had she experienced such emberment. Right, then, all was in order. No use in delaying the inevitable. Gritting her teeth, she flung the doors open. Let the games begin. Opening parenthesis closing parenthesis. Could this truly be called a game? Stannis stubbornly stifled a long-suffering sigh as he turned the scroll over in his hand, pondering his response. Having long since dressed himself, the king took another look at it, suddenly keenly aware of the heavy crown upon his head, of the faintly flickering hearth before him. It was futile, he supposed. No matter how many times he gazed upon the scroll, its contents would never change. 'Twas a simple message truly, its text consisting of little more than a simple line, its news ferreted out by none other than the spider himself. Arrived just this morning, it put a damper on what had already been a dour mood. Tywin Lannister had taken Dragonstone. A battle of no contest, considering Stannis himself had all but abandoned the castle save for a handful of men and servants. Still, it stung the stag's pride that the lion had dared to attack the defenseless keep while his back was turned. By all accounts it had been a massacre. Men, women and children alike, all butchered. Their bodies thrust on spikes outside as an example. Many of those men and women had served House Baratheon since his childhood days when he was but a boy. Now their heads decorated the walls of his old home. His hand ached for justice, tempered only by the knowledge that the old lion was trying to bait him, draw him away from King's Landing. Did he know about the Dragongal? If he did, Stannis was beginning to despise this Game of Thrones. He disdained the endless treacheries of the realm and all those who insisted upon playing this wretched game. Better to simply say what you meant and be done with it. Like his son, he both said what he meant and did what he promised. He took after him in that respect at least. The boy was stubborn, too. Another trait they shared, almost made him proud. But did he have to be so damn difficult? Fighting him over the most mundane of matters, bickering over the tiniest of things, all to save a life that he had inherited from his mother. He wanted to be just and kind. He believed a single good deed could wash out a lifetime of bad. Stannis held that the opposite rang true. Perhaps that was why they butted heads so often. Naruto was a creature of pion and determination. Once he set his mind to something, he was impossible to dissuade. Until recently, this trait benefited the realm. It made the boy implacable. Relentless. Nothing save death could stop him. Until Daenerys Targaryen. Stannis had known it the moment he'd laid eyes on that dragon girl. He'd seen the fire in those eyes. Saw her dragons. Wisdom dictated she and her children die. Who knew what chaos she could cause if left unchecked in the realm? He'd thought they'd be of one mind with this. Put her to the sword and cement their union with the Tyrells. Then they could face the realm together. One day, far in the future, he would cede the throne to, and then his heirs. The boy's children would be strong and proud, just like their parents, and that would be the end of it. Instead, the boy had fought his decree tooth and nail. Now his own blood was to wed the mother of dragons. All the while her beasts were growing, and with them, the promise of conflict. War. The Tyrells were outraged by Naruto's vow to wed Daenerys, and it was Stannis' sincere hope that this compromise would calm them. Dorne was trying to maneuver their own heir into his son's bed. Meanwhile, the Iron Islands were seething with the death of their king. Word had it that they'd found another. Whispers of an uprising from the Storm Lands. Tywin Lannister was no fool either. He wouldn't allow Daenerys' brood to reach the size of Balerion the Black. He would not wait for them to fly over Castle Rock and raze it to the ground. What of the dragons themselves? The Targaryen woman claimed she could control them, but how long before they set their sights on human prey? Thousands would flock to the Lannisters if that happened. And then there were the dead. The great enemy that Melisandre constantly spoke of, the Long Night. An enemy that cared not for Westeros or its politics, only death. How could a man fight that? Taking his head into his hands, the king growled aloud. Look at it now, he could see why Robert had grown tired of it all. Why he'd resigned himself to whores and wine. There was no honor here. No glory to be had on the field of battle. Only relentless, tireless duty. How was he to hold this realm together when it was so intent on pulling itself apart? A mountain of debt, and it was his to fix. A starving city, and it was his to fix. A war on the horizon, his to fix. A realm in peril, his to fix. His. Blast it all. Infuriated, the king of the Seven Kingdoms rose from his chair and flung the scroll into the hearth, where it was soon devoured by the hungry flames. Paper blackened and curled as he looked on, their words reduced to ash in an instant. Stannis waited until it was well and truly gone before he turned his attention back to the table. Better that Melisandre wasn't here in his chamber. He might do something he'd otherwise regret. In the end, however, his gaze roamed elsewhere. Another scroll lay near the first, set aside on the table but not forgotten. It weighed on his mind even now. The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch was asking, pleading for more men. Of course he was. The wall hadn't been properly manned in years. Stannis could think of only one way to answer that problem. A number of men, now that he set his mind to it. Perhaps there was something he could do. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Opening parenthesis ... closing parenthesis. Wake up, wake up, wake up. Naruto groaned as color crept back into his world. Let's not and say we did. He groused, squeezing his eyes shut. The voices hissed at him furiously, demanding blood for such tresp. Burn her, kill her, cut off her feet and flog her with her own spine. Not now. He grit his teeth against them until he felt something crack. Leave me be. Now, none of that. You're going to be lat for your own wedding at this rate, brother. Just a few more hours. The Ing's sun's barely up. The prince ground out, burying his head among the pillows in a desperate attempt to deafen himself. He almost succeeded. Silence answered him, and for a fleeting second, he almost dared to hope that Shireen had finally let him alone. Alas, it was not to be. When the voice piped up anew in an attempt to rouse him once more, he loosed an annoyed snarl and WPED one of the nearby pillows in the direction of the one who'd spoken. A startled yelp answered, and for a blessed instant, there was true quiet. Not a heartbeat later, all hell broke loose. Payback. With that declaration, a heavy pillow sailed unerringly through the air and struck the side of Naruto's head with a resounding whack, pitching the bedraggled blonde off the bed in a tangle of arms and legs. In the ensuing explosion of feathers, the bastard thrashed upright with a loud sputter, spitting furiously. Hey, ha! Shireen's beaming smile peering over the edge of the bed was the first thing he saw as he blinked the down out of his eyes, her own burning with delight. Got you, she giggled. Instantly, any semblance of anger he might have felt at being roused so early vanished, the whispers shoved into the darkest corner of his mind. He'd never hurt her, of course, no, never. No amount of ghastly whispers or insanity could ever drive him to do that. He'd seen precious little of his sibling during the last few days, but it chuffed him to see that she was taking to royalty like a fish to water. Becoming a princess hadn't dampened her youthful enthusiasm in the least. If anything, it only seemed to have made her all the merrier. And if anyone deigned to slight her for that, well, that's what big brothers were for. It certainly didn't put Naruto beyond a bit of payback, however. Planting a hand on the floor, he shot his sibling a dark look. You do realize this means war. Shireen's face turned pale. Naruto, don't you cry Havakandor. Eek. Quick as you please, the blonde bastard bolted upright and snagged his half-sibling by the waist, flinging her down onto the bed before she could react. Simultaneously, He dug his fingers into her sides and wriggled them like 10 mad snakes against her belly. Shireen's laughter immediately cut into her startled shout, sweet music to his ears. It wasn't long before he had her writhing helplessly beneath him, unable to stop giggling despite her best efforts. Within minutes, she flung her hands up in defeat. Stop, stop, stop. She pleaded between hysteric fits of laughter. I can't take any more. I yield. Oh, Naruto growled. Too bad. Her face flushed. Brother. Fine, fine. He relented, climbing off her and helping his darling sister up. Spoilsport. Besides. Ahem. He would have said more had not a familiar voice chose that moment to make itself known. Say what you would about Tyrion, but he was very good at remaining unnoticed. Even with his superior senses, Naruto hadn't realized they had company until the hand of the king made himself known. Righting himself with an effort, he pulled Shireen up with him and. Good to see you're finally awake. Naruto sighed. I'm up, but why are? Only then did he notice the tailor behind the dwarf. The son of the stag hissed in exasperation and stood up. Me. Not 5 minutes later, he found himself stuffed back into another blasted doublet. This one actually pinched even more than the last. Naruto stifled a long-suffering sigh against the back of his hand, trying in vain to hide from the face staring back at him. It did him little good. No matter how he might try to shy away from it, his reflection glared back at him from within the mirror, every bit his own. As was the hideous black monstrosity Tyrion forced him into. Another bloody doublet. Spirits, whomever invented these things deserved to be drawn and quartered. It pinched horribly in the most uncomfortable ways and he could barely raise his arms above his waist, much reach the dagger hidden in his boot. Wearing this finery honestly made him contemplate acts of violence. Even now he wanted to tear this blasted suit to shreds. His expression must have said as much, because Tyrion laid a roaring hand on his arm. Easy now. He soothed. It's a wedding you'll be walking into, not another battle. Might as well be the same damn thing. Naruto groused. More dangerous. If that's your opinion, how I'd hate to see it after your wedding night. Quote. I genuinely want to cut you in half right now. Shireen frowned and swatted his back. Brother. Don't say such things. You'll offend him. The dwarf gave her a pitying look. None taken, my lady. He demurred with a bow. Still, if your brother did see fit to chop me in half, that would make thee a quarter man. Doesn't quite have the same ring to it. A moment of silence ped between both men. Then Naruto snickered. Tyrion joined him. Shireen balked. Oh, you're both horrid. We're men, what did you expect? Naruto cackled as he wiped a mirthful tear from his eye. Go and fetch Ulrich, will you? Tell him I'm ready. She favored him with a playful smile. I should tell him to thrash you, besides. Maybe. Naruto conceded with a grin, but you won't. And why ever not, dear brother of mine? Because you love me. You, that's not, 7 hells. Sputtering, she darted outside, pausing only to slam the door behind her. Must you rile her so? Tyrion sighed, palming his face. She's going to get you for that. It's a thing with us these days. Naruto shrugged. Sides, she's cute when she's flustered. You know, I rather recall my brother saying the exact same about Cersei. All the humor drained from Naruto's face like pus from an old wound. What? No. That's, why would I even? I'm older than her. As you say. The dwarf shrugged. Sure you don't want to trade places? He asked of Tyrion, scowling. No, the hand demurred, holding up a hand. I'll leave the marital spats to you. They'll be yours soon enough. The son of the stag warned. Pardon, you and Shay. I've seen the way you two look at each other. You're like this. The whiskered warrior mimed a motion with his fingers, subtly delighting in the uncomfortable expression his friend now wore. Why not get married and save yourselves the trouble? That, Naruto tilted his head. That is, Tyrion paused, pondering and spoken the truth behind the prince's words and the weight it held. Not an unreasonable idea, actually. What did he have to fear? Tywin, his lord father, was far, far from here, and unable to do anything to harm him. Jaime would likely soon find himself taking the black or languishing in a cell for the rest of his life. And Cersei, no, he wasn't going to think about what had become of his sister. Why wait at all, then? It wasn't as if marrying her would lose him any more love amongst King's Landing. Part of him almost dared to hope events would transpire differently, this time. He found the notion oddly appealing. Point taken. I might take your advice, just as soon as you make it to the altar yourself. A taxing task, considering you'll need 2 cloaks. Blue eyes narrowed intently. You've poked a bear, my friend. Were they friends? Tyrion laughed and found himself startled to realize they were. The blonde treated him with more than just respect. For all his flaws, he seemed to genuinely value his advice. He could brawl with the best of them. He was loud, rude, and wholly incorrigible, but underneath it all he remained a good person. He wasn't cruel, nor a glutton, or even without mercy. An absolute madman he might be, but he knew the constraints of power and the burden that came with them. He could think of no one better to safeguard the realm. If only he didn't have such a penchant for mischief. As if to herald that very thought, the door swept open, revealing the towering form of Ulrich. Half a heartbeat ped between the 3 of them, broken only by muted footsteps. You look like shit, the Umber remarked, his face flat as stone. Tyrion couldn't help himself. He openly guffawed. Thank you ever so much for reminding me. The blonde sighed and tugged at a rosy sleeve. Fine friends, the both of you. Right, then, off to the old ball and chain. Ow. Ulrich, if he makes any more comments like that, you have my leave to hit him again. Gently, though. Wouldn't do to give our lord a concussion. Naruto groaned as he allowed himself to be escorted from the room. Traitors, both of you. But there was no rancor in his words. He knew the light-hearted banter was as much for his sake as it was theirs. Spirits, he wasn't used to all this. Part of him wanted to bolt, to quit King's Landing and put all of this nonsense behind him. The other, well, he owed that more to the whispers than any rational thought. Still, he knew his duty and would do it. No matter how much the voices might want or wish otherwise. He'd need to go on a good purge soon to get it out of his system, else he risked going berserk and hurting those he held most dear. In short order they were bundled into a carriage and escorted to the sept. The ride itself proved remarkably uneventful, for none dared to challenge them. If the sparrows were still hereabouts, they hadn't decided to move against the crown. Yet, Naruto almost wished they had. Slaughtering their ilk would have been a welcome reprieve to what he faced. Instead, he emerged from the carriage not to a horde of enemies as he'd expected, but to a crowd of well-wishers. Lord Naruto, milord, here. Endless supplications halted them as they reached the stairs, and the prince found himself forced to fend them off with promises of aid and the like. Ulrich was forced to wade through the crowd ahead of them, gently but firmly ushering the populace aside to make way for them both. It felt like hours before he finally made it to the sept. From there, time ped in a blur for Naruto. Stannis was there in the crowd with his Kingsguard, observing the proceedings with a keen eye, alert for any and all manner of disruption. Their eyes met and father and son shared a nod. Nothing more, nothing less. He marched past his Lord King without so much as a second thought and took his place before the High Septon. Minutes ped, then hours as the sept slowly swelled with people, commoner and noble alike. Here, he saw some of his old bannermen conversing with a baron. There, the Queen of Thorns, legendary for her razor wit. And over yonder the Red Woman, looking supremely smug in her scarlet silks. All the while Naruto chafed at the waiting. Blasted sept. Blasted wedding. Blasted honor and duty. The High Septon was trying to gain his attention for some reason or another. No doubt fussing at Ulrich's steadfast presence by his side. At his sword, more likely. Naruto silenced the man with a gesture. He wasn't about to forsake the protection of his staunchest ally just to satisfy the whims of some priest. He might have been forbidden from wearing armor, but the same could not be said of the Umber. This was to be a wedding among weddings after all. Their enemies would be a fool to miss this opportunity. Ironically, he almost hoped, nay, prayed, something would happen. Anything to take the edge off. Eventually the Septon recognized the futility of his efforts and began to drone prayers. An endless animal bleat that barely registered in Naruto's mind. Nevertheless, he gave the right answers and made the proper bows where necessary, silently gritting his teeth as the minutes wore on. If this was what it meant to be married in the blasted light of the seven, then he never wanted to endure it again. Better to have a plain ceremony with the old gods rather than fuss over something like this. All the while he could hear the whispers below, his sharpened senses ruthlessly catching snatches of conversation. Look at him, an old woman's voice slithered into his ear, making nice with that Targaryen wench. Should have done her like her father. Not right, it is. Another agreed. Naruto marked their faces for retribution at a later date. When the brides were at last admitted into the sept, however, his scorn faded away and his heart skipped a beat. Gods, they were beautiful. Daenerys entered first, a half step ahead of Marjorie, clad in the colors of her house, the smallest of her dragons curled about her shoulders. Even Naruto could see Viserion would soon be too large for such a perch. The rose wasn't far behind. To describe their beauty was to stop the storm. Simply, utterly impossible. A lump formed in his throat and he found himself straightening. Marjorie caught his gaze first, and he would have almost thought her smile genuine had it not been for the way she refused to look at him over long. Something in her eyes warned him there would be a reckoning for this slight, and he wasn't sure he'd enjoy it. By contrast, Daenerys never looked away, never took her gaze from him. In that moment, he truly felt as if he were gazing at a dragon, one who would devour him whole. Naruto wasn't sure which was worse. With their arrival, the High Septon droned on for what seemed like an eternity, espousing the values of their seven and their mercy and, oh, for s sake. Finally, he could stand no more. Shut your hole and get on with it. Feathers ruffled, the Septon recoiled, but did as he was bid. As you wish, my lord. Naruto needed no further inclination. Finally, in a single motion he stepped forward and seized a startled Marjorie's mouth with his, bending her backwards to raucous approval from the crowd. Not a moment later he did the same to Daenerys. The Sept's reaction proved decidedly muted to that, but he paid them no heed. Them. Pretentious pricks. Drawing a ribbon from his voluminous sleeve, the disgruntled Septon took one of their hands each and bound them together. Let it be known that Marjorie of the House Tyrell, Daenerys of the House Targaryen, and Naruto of the House Baratheon are one heart and flesh, one soul. He favored the latter with a decidedly pointed look, though his voice never once wavered. Cursed be he who would seek to tear them asunder. Cursed be he who would seek to tear them asunder. The crowd echoed after a pause. Naruto nearly bit the Septon's head off for that remark, but restrained himself. There was but one line he had left to endure, then this would be done and you may now cloak the brides and bring them under your protection. Remembering the custom such as it was, he allowed the priest to unbind the ribbon. Then he did as he was bade, wrapping first Marjorie then Daenerys each in a cloak of his own. Only then did he turn, and they with him, to face the crowd, holding their hands in his own. So, this was how it felt to be married. It felt surprisingly freeing. As if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. This time there could be no disguising the roar that rose up from the people as they walked among them. Whether it was for Marjorie or Daenerys or even himself, Naruto knew not. In all honesty, he didn't care. He wanted nothing more than to be free of the sept and attend the feast. His sole hope was to drink himself into oblivion and wipe the anxiety from his mind. Tomorrow would be the day for duty and responsibility and all the fetters that came with it. My lord. The shout was his only warning. Years of hardened instincts flung Naruto's body into motion, sending him lurching forward before his mind truly registered what was happening. It saved his life and Marjorie's both. He flung himself forward and almost immediately pain snarled through his chest as a jagged dagger thrust itself deep in the meat of his shoulder, tearing through fabric to find the flesh beneath. For a moment, the merest of seconds, his mind reeled, unable to understand what a happening. Not so his body. Even as he staggered from the searing pain, the prince beheld his attacker. No, not one. Attackers. To Naruto's dismay, he realized they faced not one, not two, but 5 Ins. Perhaps more out of sight, each brandishing weapons of the same make. Well, I wanted something exciting. Seems I got my wish. The nearest, a grim-looking man with long hair in dark leathers, already rearing back for another strike. By some miracle he managed to rip the hidden knife free from his boot and parry, slashing the blade across his attacker's face, only to see that very face peel away with a bloody edge and reveal another. What in blazes? Only then did he realize what he faced. A hue and cry went up from the crowd as those within the sept realized they were no longer safe. Hundreds pressed toward the door, trampling others underfoot, only to find them sealed. Naruto scarcely noticed. All of his being remained focused on warding off his opponent with his good arm, weaving a wall of steel between his would-be killer and his wives. Even so, the In managed to slip through his guard to nick his lower leg, drawing fresh blood. Whomever they were good. Very good. Someone had paid a fell price to procure such skilled Ins. Dracaris. For all their feats were not immune to dragonfire, however. At Daenerys's cry, Viserion leapt from his mother's shoulders and screamed his fury to the world, bathing the man in napalm. The In collapsed within seconds, his screams withered to a whisper. In the smoke and confusion, Ulrich thundered past them and crashed into a second faceless man attempting to flank the mother of dragons, driving him to the floor with his bulk. Miv hands descended on the prone man's skull and squeezed with bone-crushing force, rendering his visage little more than a red stain on the sept floor. Naruto swore, searching for another In. He found a third drilled to the wall by a baron's spear. A fourth met his end on Loris's blade. Naruto nearly despaired. Alive. They needed one of them alive for questioning. To me. Someone was shouting and he startled to realize it was Stannis, raining down blows on the fourth. Everyone to me. That one. Naruto bellowed over the chaos, running. Keep him alive. Whether his lord father heard him Naruto knew not, only that the king took the man's arm and smote him across the head with the hilt of his sword. His attacker collapsed in a boneless heap and just like that, it was over. All the faceless men lay dead or cut to ribbons by the defenders. Gradually, the prince became aware of the voices around him, heard the screams of the wounded and drying, but he cared not a whit for any of them. Despite the pain, despite the agony in his leg, he'd never felt more alive. Heart pounding in his ears, vision gone red with a ghastly crimson field, he lived only in the moment. And in this moment, he wanted justice. Ignoring Marjorie's pleas, grimacing around the pain, he descended on his would-be killer and struck him hard in the stomach. The man jolted awake with a pained grunt and, not satisfied, Naruto struck him again, his boot bloodying the man's nose. Who sent you? He demanded. Tell me it'll be quick. To his disbelief, the In actually smiled. A man cannot tell you. Blue eyes burned red. You will.